Welcome back, it's me, Lou. Today we're going to talk about a very special custom action figure that I recently completed. Okay, so not too long ago I did a review on this guy right here. This is the McFarlane DC Multiverse Deathstroke. This represents Deathstroke as he appeared in DC Rebirth. So this is pretty much like the modern iteration of the character. You know, if you pick up the comic books nowadays, chances are Deathstroke is going to look closely to what you see here. It's kind of a much more modern take on the character. In terms of his costume design, it's a little bit more on the utilitarian and minimalist end of things. You know, he's not decked out with excessive amounts of armor. It's very basic, very bare bones. And, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm ragging on this figure. Actually, I like this figure a lot. If you go back and watch my review, I think I give this figure maybe a near perfect or perfect score. It's a really beautiful figure. The proportions are great. The articulation's wonderful. The detailing and sculpting is just top notch. This is a really well done action figure, and it's just really cool. And you know, every time I look at this figure, it just makes me want to hunt around for more Deathstroke action figures, because I think Deathstroke's a really cool guy. I'm not the most hardcore Deathstroke fan, but I am a fan. Visually, I'm just very drawn to this character. There's something very wonderful about the asymmetry of his design. The character has a very interesting backstory. You know, he's kind of complicated and filled with layers. So everything about this character and costume, I think, is just very intriguing. So, after I reviewed this figure, I was kind of staring at it, and I'm like, man, I kind of wish McFarlane would actually give us a classic version of Deathstroke. And I think that's going to be in the cards. I think in the future, hopefully the near future, they'll give us a much more classic rendition of the character. They've already taken that approach. You know, they've given us two different versions of Martian Manhunter. You know, they've given us the much more modern version of the character. And they kind of gave us the throwback version. And, you know, I think it's just a matter of time before we get, you know, the throwback version of Deathstroke here. And when I talk about the older Deathstroke, you know, I kind of think of the older comic books, you know, Teen Titans and artist George Perez and stuff like that, or Mike Zeck and the different artists who kind of portray or illustrated Deathstroke in different costumes, or, you know, kind of the much more traditional looks. So this action figure here is the DC Comics Icons. This came out way back when. God, I can't find a date on this. I bought this years ago. And the deal with the Icons line is that, you know, they're going to give us the much more iconic versions of the characters. And in this case, this was Deathstroke as he appeared in the Judas Contract. DC Collectibles, they produced some really, really awesome and wild action figures, and this is definitely one of my favorites. This really portrays Deathstroke in his most iconic form. It's very, you know, there's something about this character very visually. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s and you think of Deathstroke, this is the guy you're going to see in your head. His costume, there's some things that kind of echo Taskmaster and Captain America. He has the scale mail. He has the swashbuckling buccaneer gloves and boots. He has his trademark sword. He has the alternate portrait with the eye patch. This figure is awesome. The only thing that kind of bothered me with this figure is that the scale of it was a little bit small. I'm not necessarily a scale guy, but at the time I had an entire collection of Mattel DC Classics action figures, and this figure, as great as it looks, it didn't scale properly with that line, and I kind of wish it did, because, you know, if you have an entire shelf and universe of your own of all the DC guys, it'd be nice to actually have, you know, different iterations and versions of the characters represented on the shelf. But it'd be nice if they all kind of scaled well together. You know, unfortunately, these guys were just off by a little, but the figures in the Icons line, they were always fantastic. They give you lots of accessories, and the detailing and sculpting and articulation was just top notch, especially for back then. You know, these were great action figures, and this is still one of my more prized figures in my display collection. So for me, it's I really wish McFarlane would, you know, take, you know, their modern engineering and expertise and give us this look here. Um, and for me, it's like I think one of the closest action figures I got to, like, in my head, like near perfection, was this guy right here. I love this figure. This is like one of my favorite figures from the DC Universe line by Mattel, and this is the unmasked Deathstroke. There's two versions. There's one with the mask and without the mask. I have both, and unfortunately, this figure, I'm like cursed. Every time I bought this figure, like I think 2 or 3 times. I bought the masked one, and then I bought the unmasked one twice. And every time I've handled the figure, it suffers from terrible, like, stuck joints. Like, the bicep gets stuck to the shoulder joint, and you can't swivel it because it's, like, stuck. And when you try swiveling it, you're actually tearing at the peg. And I've broken, arms on both figures, and it's just a mess. Mattel, they produce such beautiful figures with the Classics and Universe line, but for whatever reason, the quality control wasn't the greatest. I mean, for example, here's a figure packaged in the box, and the right arm is actually twisted backwards, and it's ripping off of the shoulder joint right there. So, that's the kind of quality control we got from Mattel back in the day. It wasn't always the greatest. On paper, the figures were amazing, but it was always kind of like a crapshoot in terms of the quality that you actually got in hand. But this is definitely one of my favorite versions, if not of Deathstroke. And I'd love it if, that's one thing I like about this figure a lot. It captures everything about this figure, with the unmasked head and everything, but the paint job's premium, the articulation's great, and you get all the accessories. And it's just a matter of time, I kind of feel that, McFarlane's going to come along and give us that, with this modern engineering. But I'm kind of an impatient person, so I kind of took it upon myself to make my version of classic Deathstroke. Now, it's not perfect by any means. The color scheme's kind of off, but for me, it's much more comic book and legacy inspired than anything else. It's as close as an approximation that I could do using this figure as the base. So I use this figure as the base, and I kind of want to recreate something that kind of echoes this look. And let's take a look at my custom Deathstroke. And here he is. This is my custom comic book inspired legacy Deathstroke. And now this in my head is a perfect custom. And when I say perfect, it's not that I'm like being braggy, but the entire experience for me to create this was like perfect. I didn't mess up. It's a very perfect custom in the sense that I didn't have to apply any paint. There's no handcrafting involved. It's a very stock looking action figure. For me, my end goal with creating custom action figures nowadays is that I'm in the mindset where by the time I'm done, I want to have an action figure that feels and looks very stock. And when I say stock, I mean that it should look like a toy that came straight out of the manufacturing plant. It doesn't look like someone took it and did more with it than necessary. Like, I see a lot of beautiful customs on the internet, and they're all great. Don't get me wrong, but then every now and then you might put too much paint on it, and it's over embellished to the point where it becomes more of like a piece of art than an action figure. For me, a custom in my head should look like something that could flow well with the rest of the toys on your shelf. If my skill set was a lot higher, ideally I'd love to be able to do all sorts of crazy stuff like, airbrush and like edge highlight and shade the figure and all that. But, at this point in my life, my time is very limited. And if I get away with creating a very beautiful action figure that looks stock in like a short amount of time, and when I say short, for me, like, I love taking on projects that, only take like an afternoon or a very short evening. And that was the case here. So let's compare it with the original stock figure. So here's the stock figure, and then here's my custom. So you can see some of the changes right off the bat. For one, he has the large bullets draped over his chest, much like this guy here. And these are actually the same bullets taken from this action figure. I kind of took my broken action figure and I cannibalized it and salvaged whatever parts were possible to make this guy here. So you know, in many ways, this guy's kind of the spiritual successor to this. He's kind of inherited all this guy's accessories. So he has the bullet draped over his chest. That's taken from this guy. He has the sheath and his sword, which is taken from this guy. The gloves and the boots I kind of felt were a necessity. You know, like classic Deathstroke, I think it's one of those key ingredients that a lot of characters had in the 80s. You've seen it with like Captain America, Cyclops, Taskmaster. They all had these like buccaneer gloves and boots. And I really felt that if I was going to go the legacy route, I really needed to recreate that here. So, like I said, I cannibalized whatever pieces I could from my broken toy here. And I carried over the gloves and then the boots. It was kind of like performing surgery because, you know, for this guy here, those pieces don't necessarily detach from the forearms and the legs. For the gloves, I had to take an X-Acto knife and chop them off. The boots were a different story. They kind of like were a separate piece, but I had to use an X-Acto knife to like shave them down so that it fit comfortably around this guy's calf muscles. And performing surgery was kind of a delicate process because in order to get the gloves to work on this guy's forearms, I had to actually take the X-Acto knife and cut off the excess parts of the arms that I didn't need. And then very, you know, carefully super glued them and try to get them in line so they were straight. And then I ran into the issue of trying to get the hands to be compatible with the older forearms or the glove pieces, and that was a kind of a nightmare in itself, but it worked out in the end. As you can see here too, I talk about this in the video review of this guy. He has holster straps on his legs, but there are no holsters. There's even at the point where there's actually a socket in his leg, but because, you know, McFarlane can't bundle guns with their action figures anymore, they did away with the holster and the gun. So I took the holster from this guy and the pistol and attached them to this guy's leg. The knife and the sheath were actually taken from this guy. I removed them from his left calf muscle and just relocated them onto his upper thigh. And then I extended the strap. I had to create new straps on the back. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. You know, overall, like I said, for me, this was the perfect customizing experience. You know, in the end, the final result, it's a very stock looking action figure. You know, this looks like it could be a stock toy. It doesn't look like a custom in the sense that, you know, it was like overly embellished or, you know, I didn't have to like add any clay or Sculpey to it. And it's almost there. It's not perfect by any means. Like ideally, it falls short of being the classic Deathstroke. You know, for one, this guy doesn't have the chainmail in the areas where he needs it. He only has the chainmail on his left pectoral muscle and his upper arm here. You know, the classic version, he has the chainmail on his abdomen and then on both arms. Also, he has metallic blue on him. That's something I was contemplating. I kind of felt like this guy needed some blue on him, but again, I say this all the time in my videos, I can't deal with like paint rub. You know, this guy is very articulated, and I think that's one of the best things about this action figure. I talk about this in my video review. Like, if you handle this figure, you know, trying to move him and pose him and trying to articulate him, it's like such a awesome experience because he doesn't have a lot of that excessive plastic that a lot of action figures do nowadays. You know, he doesn't have like heavy body armor on him or capes that get in the way. And there's just something about this guy. Everything just moves so smoothly. You know, compared to like some of the McFarlane figures we've gotten like in like the early waves. You know, the ab cut here is really nice and clean. You know, everything about him just articulates so smoothly. And I didn't want to worry about, you know, chipping paint and stuff because I wanted to paint his chest and, you know, stomach blue. So I kind of just opted to leave it black. You know, in my head, this is kind of a proxy. It's kind of a fill-in until McFarlane gives us this guy. So I'm just counting down the days till they give us classic Deathstroke. But until then, you know, for me, this is kind of like the fill-in. It's not perfect, but the experience was. You know, this was one of those deals where everything was just coming together smoothly. I didn't run into any hiccups. There were some challenges and some parts where I was holding my breath, but And I think the end result overall, it resulted in a very clean action figure. You know, it still retains all the articulation. You know, he has all the major high points of classic Deathstroke with the gloves and the boots. And this is great. You know, I'm so happy with this. It's such a fun thing. And that's what I say all the time. You know, if you've never made a custom before, you know, give it a shot. I think you'll surprise yourself. You know, it's cool to like find an action figure in the wild and take photos of it and share it on like social media and stuff. But, you know, to take the time to take something that wasn't there before and, you know, just to be able to like take an idea in your head and make it tangible. It's a very rewarding experience. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect either. I think that's something that intimidates some people sometimes, is that, you know, if you've never painted an action figure or if you've never taken one apart, you know, it could seem very intimidating. But, you know, you got to take, you know, baby steps before you can walk. You got to walk before you can run, you know. So that's kind of my mentality. It's like, you know, with every custom, I kind of learn something new, and then I carry, you know, those lessons over into the next one. So yeah, I can't stress it enough. You know, if the idea of creating a custom appeals to you, you know, even if it's just a little bit, you know, give it a shot. You know, whether it's just like swapping out a head or like, you know, just a subtle repaint somewhere, it's pretty cool. You know, there's something to be said about this creating a figure for yourself. You know, especially nowadays with all the resources that are available to us. You know, you have people that have access to 3D printers, and there's some amazing things going on there. But yeah, I just wanted to share this with you. This is my legacy comic book inspired Deathstroke. It's not the most perfect figure, but for me, the experience was perfect. Like I said, you know, this turned out a lot better than I thought. And, you know, I was so hesitant about doing certain things, like cutting off the arms on this guy, hoping that these arms would be compatible, was such a nail-biting experience, you know, trying to make sure everything was going to fit right. And I'm very impulsive when I work. I don't plan things out. I don't measure things out. And in the past, it would cost me, but I've made enough mistakes in my time to think that I got to the point where I'm comfortable enough where I could, like, you know, pull stuff off and just hope that luck's on my side. So yeah, here's my Deathstroke. It's pretty cool. Alright, so let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you are new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer or subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So, until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I will see you at the next one. Alright, later.